1939 was declared motion pictures' greatest year by Hollywood before it even began. Studios had hoped the statement might distract from looming antitrust lawsuits against them. But in the end, Hollywood made movies the perfect antidote to the Great Depression in America and war overseas.
As long as it remains within my power to prevent, there will be no blackout of peace in the United States.
Gone with the Wind became the highest-grossing movie of all time, while The Wizard of Oz helped cement color films as the wave of the future. Westerns became critical hits with Stagecoach and Destry rides again, while films like Ninotchka and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington did their best to tackle social issues within the confines of the production code.
1939 is an unprecedented year in film history. There had been no year like it before, and really no year like it since. It's a year where there were no film duds, and I can't even imagine that in today's context.
What you get is this incredible sense of potential with every idea rushing to the screen at the same time. It's probably the most fertile moment in the golden age because the war comes along and everything shuts back down again. But right then in 1939, anything was possible, and that's everything that they did.
1939 was a big comeback for Universal Horror. There had been worries with the production code. Movies like Daughter of Dracula had been heavily censored. There was also this misunderstanding at Universal that in 1936, the British government was maybe going to crack down on horror movies, so the productions got pulled back. But here you see them returning with two really fun films.
In the Universal Monster pantheon of Frankenstein, the two movies everybody always talks about are Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein. As they should, both great. But a movie they really should be paying attention to is Son of Frankenstein, because it's not actually about Frankenstein or Frankenstein's monster, it's about Igor.
Bela Lugosi has arguably his best role in this movie. Yes, maybe even better than Dracula, as Igor the Hunchback. Lugosi didn't get a lot of great roles, but this one allows him to be funny, it allows him to be sort of menacing, and to actually go between threatening and pathetic in a way that keeps the audience on their toes.
You crazy fool! If Crow finds him, he'll kill him. Then he won't be any good to either of us. You get out of here. If I find you hanging around here again, I'll... He's mine! He don't belong to you! You go away! Not me!
This was the last time that Boris Karloff played Frankenstein, partially because the makeup was so heavy that it was physically painful to wear. So when you watch it and he still puts in this beautiful performance, it's impressive to think that he had done this over and over and over again, and he was still managing to create such a dynamic character.
It's got such an interesting visual style. It's got that German expressionist set, and it gives that whole Gothic feel to it. It's almost like a stage play.
Really tall ceilings, slanted roofs. There's a staircase that with a bit of shadow work looks like bones against the wall. And the biggest notable thing is that there is a massive portrait of the original Frankenstein above the living room, which is really looming over all of the characters and really sets a sense of stakes, especially for Baron Frankenstein. And it really is, in that way, a film about trying to make your dad proud.
I think Son of Frankenstein is a real example of not learning from the mistakes of your ancestors. It's kind of unbelievable that Victor Frankenstein's son would commit the same crimes as his father.
Tower of London might seem a bit unusual for the Universal horror canon because it's historical, because it's a little more realistic. But you have to remember that this is Roland V. Lee, who also made The Son of Frankenstein the same year, and he brought along Boris Karloff, and they were kind of working in that same groove and milieu.
We have Basil Rathbone as this debonair but treacherous Richard III, who's prepared to do anything he can to get to the throne. And then you have Boris Karloff as his really forbidding henchman Mort.
Vincent Price plays the Duke of Clarence in this, but then reprises the role as the Duke of Gloucester in a future iteration of the film. And you see him in both roles play a nuanced take on villain and victim and you see someone who becomes like a face of horror grow into himself.
I think Tower of London is often written off as kind of a lesser universal horror, kind of a weird pseudo-horror, but it has at least one moment that is pretty wild, which is this massive battle scene. It is this epic scene with hundreds of extras, you know, recreating these classic British battles in the California wilderness with cardboard armor in the rain. But it looks good enough, and it probably really popped on screen.
It's the story of Richard III without all that pesky Shakespeare in it. It's kind of cartoonish in that way, like the Shakespearean drama of it is constantly being deflated by these like scenes of Karloff like dragging his foot as he prepares to murder children and like boil people in wine and stuff. You will get the story of Richard III, but you're gonna get it at this like level of camp that is wild.
Gloucester's dollhouse is such a great narrative device. We're really getting to see, as all of these characters die off, how he moves the pieces around.
These people were not individuals to him anymore. They were literally little figures that were disposable, that were just kind of obstacles in his way. That to me was such a stroke of genius of showing that path in a movie like this. It's not just a historical drama. There are some kind of very heavy, borderline horror elements to it as well.
Romantic tragedies are one of the oldest storytelling types, and you see two big films in 1939 exploring that in Wuthering Heights and Dark Victory.
When Bette Davis made Dark Victory, she was coming off of 2 Oscar wins at an incredibly young age, one for Dangerous and one for Jezebel. This was really her Oscar to lose.
I think one of Bette Davis's strengths is that she can really switch between soft and emotional and very strong, like on a dime. And I think this character, Judith, that she plays in this film is really going through those motions. She's, you know, a socialite that feels very confident and is very sassy, but also she gets this diagnosis that sort of shakes her to her core.
A lot of Bette Davis's greatest films would be with her co-star in Dark Victory, George Brent. At the time, they both were suddenly divorced, and they started having a real affair off screen. And I think you really feel that in the flirty energy here. This is obviously a very sad story, but there are these light comedic moments when Bette Davis is flirting with her doctor that are really charming.
Now, don't be frightened of this. It's just an electric light.
You're very kind to your guinea pigs, aren't you?
Just look straight ahead, please.
I've been told they're a nice color. Do you agree?
Just once again, please.
That they're a nice color.
George Brent is also kind of this great self-effacing actor. He said the most important thing an actor can have is a good-looking back of his head, because he knew it was just a women's industry at the time, and he was just kind of a prop for Bette.
When asked later in life what the film role was that she was most proud of, Bette Davis would consistently answer Dark Victory. And I think when you watch it, you see why. This could be a simple melodrama where a woman just wastes away. It's a story that's based on Camille, and yet it's so much more because of Bette Davis's very nuanced performance.
Wuthering Heights wasn't the first Gothic romance produced by a studio, but like a lot of films made in 1939, it showed everybody what the perfect ideal of a Gothic romance movie was.
The relationship between Heathcliff and Kathy is one that is very much a tug of war. They clearly love each other, want to be with each other, but they have the society and the social standings pulling them apart.
In spite of all the amazing Technicolor films of 1939, Wuthering Heights cinematographer Greg Toland won the Oscar for Best Cinematography. Here, partially because he is using black and white just to this amazing degree. He is using the Mitchell BNC cameras for the first time, a kind of prototype of what would become the basic studio camera, but he was using these big arc lamps to kind of get the best contrast and really finding these amazing shots in the film.
Very recently, when Michelle Yeoh was nominated for Best Actress, they kept calling her the first openly Asian actress to win, which baffled some people. That's because Merle Oberon hid the fact that she was of Indian descent. She had her mother repainted as a white woman in the lobby of her home. So you have this fascinating thing happening on screen where a white man is playing a person of color and a woman of color is playing a white woman in a text that can't seem to acknowledge its own racial dimensions at all.
Even though Laurence Olivier was a real handful on the set of Wuthering Heights, Merle Oberon does say that looking back, she found it to be a real privilege to realize she was watching kind of one of the world's greatest actors learn to adapt his style to film. She's like, it was an unpleasant experience, but it was still a very important experience in her life.
What's old is new again in 1939, and you saw two films that sought to reinvent the Western genre in Stagecoach and Destry Rides Again.
No director was more on fire in 1939 than John Ford. He had 3 films that year. He had Young Mr. Lincoln starring Henry Fonda, and he also had Drums Along the Mohawk, but the one that we remember him for is Stagecoach.
John Wayne had been a star for a decade before Stagecoach, but a minor star. He had starred in dozens of B westerns, most of them under an hour long. John Ford had known him for many years, but didn't consider him ready for the big leagues. And when I think of Stagecoach, I think when anybody thinks of Stagecoach, they remember that first shot of John Wayne, where the camera reveals him in all of his splendor, the ultimate A Star is Born entrance.
Hello, kid. Hello, Curly. Hiya, Buck. How's your folks?
Oh, just fine, Ringo, except my grandfather came out.
Shut up.
Stagecoach is sort of the primal scene of the John Wayne thing. And so whatever you think of the John Wayne thing, you have to watch Stagecoach, I think, to have an opinion on it and why it loomed so large for so long.
This idea of the stagecoach, what is the stagecoach? Well, it's kind of a metaphor for America. Inside the stagecoach, you have a religious leader, you have a sex worker, you have a banker, you have like kind of this moving allegory for the American West, these symbols of civilization moving along, literally traveling west.
Stagecoach is about redemption. It's about an American way of life that is all about freedom. And it's a film that is quite ideological, but really cements what America wanted to see of themselves in their past.
I really love Destry Rides Again because it's a reinterpretation of Westerns that aren't your dad's Western. It's taking the genre and updating it with a very modern main character.
Destry Rides Again is the first instance of Jimmy Stewart in a Western. There'd be many, many more after, but this is really an instance where you see actors who had never before been in a Western really understanding how that genre works.
What I love about this film is how it transposes the idea of masculinity. When the town first meets Destry, you know, this new assistant sheriff that's coming in, he's holding a parakeet and a parasol. You know, he does not look like the tough shooter that they expect.
Marlene Dietrich has come out of exile, not so much retirement, but exile. She was on the infamous box office poison list and hadn't been in a picture in a couple of years. And she was offered this role of Frenchie, the saloon singer owner. And she sings a few songs in this movie, one of which becomes her signature, as she's for years afterwards during the war entertaining the USO and troops abroad with The Boys in the Back Room. It's her signature song.
I think Destry Rides Again has one of the greatest catfights of all time. It goes on, and the camera can barely keep up with them. We have frying pans flying across the saloon, we have bottles of booze. Finally, Jimmy Stewart has to pour a whole pitcher of water over these two girls to break them up.
There were no stunt doubles. This is just two women who really went for it and apparently fought pretty hard. It was pretty fun for everyone to watch, but Marlene Dietrich notes that, you know, first they did it and it was great. Then they had to do it again for another camera. Then they had to do it for Life magazine, and she said that Jimmy Stewart poured water on them for hours.
Jimmy Stewart is lanky and goofy, but he's also very sexy, and to Marlene Dietrich's body and bold and brilliant performance, that equals chemistry on screen.
Comedies and farce in 1939 are occurring in the shadow of the Great Depression, so it's little surprise that climbing the social ladder becomes a major plot point in films like The Women and Midnight.
The Women, which could also be called The Real Housewives of 1939, follows a group of rich, upper-class Manhattan housewives who are supposedly friends. The film revolves around Norma Shearer's character, Mary Haynes, who finds out that her husband is having an affair with a perfume counter girl played deliciously by Joan Crawford.
Even though it was just a marketing gimmick, The Women does remain one of the only films ever to have an all-female cast, and that includes all of the animals, apparently, which were girls too.
Famously, The Women has a 10-minute Technicolor sequence right in the middle of the movie, and it is a fashion show of just European, surrealist, inflected, Parisian couture in the vein of Schiaparelli, like outlandish, crazy clothing that only these women might wear.
It's just this burst of joy that comes through the middle of the movie, and it's a delight to watch the designs by Adrian just get showcased. It's just stunning, and it takes you sort of out of the cattiness for a moment into some beauty.
I think you have to view it as a historical artifact. That train to Reno full of women who are going to divorce, and they have to establish a residency before they're allowed to get divorced. I think that might send you to Google and say, like, did that really happen? It's such a specific time when The Women is set. You know, 1939, before World War II swept women into the workforce, when women had very little currency or power that didn't come from being attached, either by marriage or sex, to a man.
Midnight was a film that was billed as Cinderella Goes to Paris, and in this case, our Cinderella is the luminous Claudette Colbert.
We know it's a Cinderella story because the opening titles are over a clock to give you that sense of the countdown. And I also think there's a nice bit of visual wit in that Colbert's character arrives in Paris, not in a stagecoach as Cinderella did to the ball, but just in coach on a train, sleeping on the bench of a train.
Midnight is another script from Billy Wilder and Charles Brackett, kind of two of the inventors of the rom-com, but here it's directed by Mitchell Leeson. Apparently, Wilder and Leeson especially fought a lot about changes in dialogue, and this is partially what inspired Billy Wilder to become a director himself. But looking back, Billy Wilder says he does consider Midnight to be one of the best films someone else made of his script.
There's a lot of chemistry between Claudette Colbert and Don Amici, who plays Tibor, the taxi driver, and I just love to see them kind of banter between each other.
There's a man. Well, it's what I've been waiting for all my life. Please, we'll make some excuse to those people downstairs, and you'll leave in the morning.
Careful, this is a rented suit.
Everybody loves John Barrymore, and everybody loves a John Barrymore drunk story. But at this point in his life, he is basically debilitated with his alcoholism. He's not doing well. So this offers the opportunity for his wife, Elaine Barry's only on-screen role, because she was brought in to be in scenes to basically wrangle him, to make sure that he could see where the cue cards were so that he could say his lines. It's really just tells you the star power of this person, that these were accommodations they were willing to make for him and what he was dealing with.
For a romantic farce from 1939, Midnight is incredibly fresh and vibrant. It's a film that really keeps you guessing, and the way the tables keep turning has a lot in common with some of the snappier comedies of today.
In 1939, with Roosevelt shaking up politics in America and uncertainty overseas, it just felt like a time where anything could happen in politics.
In Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Jimmy Stewart plays Jefferson Smith, who's this kind, good-natured, optimistic head of the Boy Rangers who gets installed as senator, and he's terrible for this position because he has absolutely no experience. But in some ways, that actually kind of makes him the perfect person for this position.
If you didn't know the US Constitution before seeing this film, you will definitely recognize it and understand it when he gives his famous 24-hour filibuster scene. This is really Jimmy Stewart as we came to know him, as how we picture him today. His character of Mr. Smith is so synonymous with Jimmy Stewart as an actor.
All this stuff I've been telling you about this land you live in is a lot of hooey. This isn't your country. It belongs to a lot of James Taylors. Oh, no, not me. And anybody here that thinks I'm going to do that, they got another thing coming. Well, that's all right. I just wanted to find out whether you still had faces.
So the question is, did Frank Capra invent the Jimmy Stewart persona, or did he just know how to bring it out to its kind of fullest realization? Lots of people dismiss that signature Capra combination of sentiment and humor. They call it Capricorn. But I think what saves him is actually the darkness in his films, that sort of layer of ambivalence that they always have. He acknowledges that life is cruel, and then somehow Capra can sort of show you that this stuff happens and still give you hope.
Mr. Smith Goes to Washington was banned by just about every fascist country. Italy, Spain, Germany. It was a huge threat to them.
Mr. Smith Goes to Washington was, maybe not surprisingly, a very controversial film. It showed a lot of problems that could and probably did exist in the US government. Pre-war, they were worried that making America look weak at all was a big problem. But Frank Capra really understood the public, really cared about the public, and said, you know what, let this movie out. I promise you it will be fine. And the public just responded so well to it.
There's timeless qualities in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and if you watch it today, you sort of, maybe you sigh because the world is so cynical and going through a lot right now, but we mustn't forget the good that's in us and in people, and Capra is able to just perfectly pitch for that.
My favorite film of 1939 is Ernst Lubitsch's Ninotchka. Ninotchka was written by Billy Wilder, who had fled Nazi Germany, and it's directed by Ernst Lubitsch, who had lived through the horrors of World War I in Germany. These are two people working in collaboration that knew what was going to happen to the world in just a few short years.
It's about a communist leader who comes back to Europe to basically chasten a bunch of misbehaving members of the party who are being beguiled by capitalism. Naturally, Garbo's character is also susceptible in the specific form of urbane Melvyn Douglas, and it falls for his charms.
Ninotchka marked Greta Garbo's first comedy. She'd risen to fame for playing these really tragic, somber characters and having this very glacial sort of facial expression. So when the film was marketed with the catchphrase, Garbo laughs, everyone wanted to go see it.
Ernst Lubitsch was excited to work with Greta Garbo, but he also said that she was one of the most inhibited actresses he ever worked with. He really points to the scene where she has to be drunk as something Garbo really struggled with. It's funny because, you know, she said that she felt very unbecoming and stupid in that scene, but she is so charming, so funny, and so sexy in that scene. It's very surprising.
Let's form our own party.
Right. Lovers of the world unite.
And we won't stretch up our arms.
No, no, no.
We won't clench our fists.
No, no.
Our salute will be a kiss.
Yes. A kiss. Salute.
It is slapstick, it is a rom-com, it has political values and perspectives that are quite striking and quite anti-capitalist accidentally. And when viewed from today's standpoint, it's a fairly scathing satire of how Americans see themselves and how that hubris has limited their capacity to reflect on themselves.
Ninotchka gets seduced away from seriousness towards a kind of frivolity. She goes from being quiet and aloof and not talking to sort of giving a full-on, you know, almost kind of romantic comedy performance. And because it's directed by Ernst Lubitsch, who pretty much only ever made perfect movies, it's just perfectly made.
By 1939, it seemed sort of inevitable that we were being drawn into another world war, and people were still hurting a lot from the First World War. So you saw a lot of films wringing their hands and trying to deal with how a society should feel on the edge of war yet again.
Rules of the Game is probably the greatest war film ever made, which is wild because there's no war in it, but like it is so soaked through with the anxiety of World War II and with the sense that something terrible is about to happen and that French society is just not prepared. Renoir said, "It's a film about dancing atop a volcano."
The plot is very simple. A group of aristocrats arrive at a country chateau for a weekend hunting party, accompanied by their lower-class servants. Where things get very complicated is in the tangled web of romantic relationships that is quickly revealed.
Part of what makes this so successful is that Renoir really uses those sort of stage techniques that were famous in French theater, of course, the farce. But he also combines them with really interesting filmmaking techniques and some very cutting-edge camera for the time. For instance, he uses a lot of deep focus and a lot of moving camera to keep everything feeling very present and very active, even though he is using a very theatrical style.
It's casual. That's the fun part. I think Jean Renoir, the master of dramaturgy and comedy, and he's so perfect at commenting on class, right? Because he comes from a place, he's the son of an artist. He is a poet and a painter in the cinematic sense.
You wouldn't have Robert Altman's masterpiece, Gosford Park, nor would you have Downton Abbey without Renoir making Rules of the Game.
At the time, The Rules of the Game was the most expensive French film ever made. It was highly anticipated, and it was met with a disastrous response from French audiences. Not only was it booed, but they tried to burn down the theater.
All these priests organized protests against it. It was banned because it was influencing the youth, and now it stands as this unbelievable, oracular summary of what is about to happen to Europe and sort of the end of a whole way of life.
Goodbye, Mr. Chips is based on the novel of the same name by James Hilton. It's actually a book that's been adapted quite a few times, but I think this 1939 version hits different simply because it is about war and how war can change the dynamics of relationships. And in 1939, on the edge of a war, it just is so infused with feeling.
Goodbye, Mr. Chips takes place between 1870 and 1933. It follows several wars as a teacher ushers in new generations of students over and over again.
The formula is irresistible, and it's one of those movies that deals with something I think is pretty universal, which is that we all have mentor figures and we can never outgrow them no matter how old we get. And anytime you've ever seen students, stand on their desk or you have a slow clap for an educator in a movie, it reverts back to this one.
They really set up the kind of stiff upper lip glory of boys and young men in England at the time. The scene where they're reading Latin while the bombs are going off outside. And so that when the war actually does really impact the school, you have come to love these boys. You have come to love their chipper ways.
It's somewhat secondary importance. But believe me, you can't judge the importance of things by the noise they make.
Goodbye, Mr. Chips was filmed at an actual boys' school, and reportedly several hundred of the staff and students stayed at the school over the breaks so that they could appear in this film.
In the year that Gone with the Wind dominated the Oscars, Robert Donat won Best Actor. He beat Clark Gable, and it's no wonder. It's the Oscar performance. He gets to age 50 years. He gets to have a full character arc, going from the rigid teacher of the early scenes to the softer, more humanized teacher. He gets to do old man shtick. How could they not give him the Oscar? It's got everything they like.
What really shines in this movie is the harsh criticism of the economies of war and the realities of war without standing on a soapbox and preaching that to you. They just show you the sadness left in the wake of death and the distance between what you believe you're doing when you die for your country and the pain of those that are left behind.
Technicolor was a bit of a beast in 1939. The Technicolor process meant that cameras were exposing 3 strips of film at once instead of just the one, which meant the cameras were huge, they were noisy, they were heavy. So the films that are using Technicolor in 1939 are the big heavy hitters.
Gone with the Wind as a book written by Margaret Mitchell was known by virtually everyone. This was the most anticipated literary adaptation of that generation.
More people bought tickets to Gone with the Wind than any other American movie. That if you adjust for inflation, that if you actually talk about the number of people who went to see a movie, things like Star Wars and Avatar and Marvel can't really compete.
Gone with the Wind had one of the most famous and infamous casting calls of all time. People were dying to know who was going to get to play Scarlett O'Hara. The fact that Vivien Leigh was a relatively unknown actress from England actually angered a lot of people. Audiences didn't believe in her casting until they actually saw the film's premiere.
I think it says something that the first Black woman to win an Oscar, the first Black person to win an Oscar, won it for a role where she's playing up a stereotype, right? Where she's sensationalizing the mammy trope. And that's what she's celebrated for at an Oscar ceremony where she couldn't even sit in the audience with the rest of the cast. She's sitting in the back of the theater.
Hattie McDaniel really felt that she could take a stock role and make something special out of it. And I think you hear a lot of that in her really heartfelt Oscar acceptance speech. While the production of Gone with the Wind was not free of racism, David O. Selznick felt a kinship with Hattie McDaniel and her struggle, and often consulted her when it came to the script. He also worked with Black activists and leaders. He eliminated all use of the N-word in the script. He eliminated all references to the Ku Klux Klan. It is not perfect, but there was a mind that this film might upset Black leaders at the time.
I feel like Gone with the Wind's reputation has as much to do with its scale as it does its achievement, you know? The house, the sets, the costumes, the length, the subject matter. We all remember certain incredibly iconic scenes, like that one shot where the camera pulls back and you see all the wounded soldiers.
What you can't do is you can't imagine what that would be like to see a movie of that scale and scope for the first time. You sort of can't go back, you can't put yourself into the infancy of movies. There are a lot of things that movies can do, and being big and long and self-important isn't the only one. But, you know, Gone with the Wind kind of cornered the market on those qualities, and I'm not sure that it's really been surpassed in the almost 90 years since.
As an adult, I'm always surprised how The Wizard of Oz can sweep me off my feet. It's a film that I grew up with as a child, and yet as an adult, I haven't lost that wonder for it. I haven't lost my love for it.
To audiences in 1939, the book would have been the Harry Potter of its day. By all accounts, The Wizard of Oz was financially disappointing, at least compared to its budget, and it really gained its reputation through TV airings.
The Wizard of Oz has this incredible staying power in culture. It's the hero's journey lensed around the story of a young woman just trying to reconnect with herself. The shift in the movie from black and white to color when Dorothy lands in Oz is one of the most magical moments in cinema that I can remember.
So much of what I think makes this movie really work is Judy Garland. She is phenomenal. She just has this like beautiful, innocent, wide-eyed energy to her. It's amazing that she maintained that given how difficult this shoot was at times.
For a movie that's ostensibly about a dream, the production of The Wizard of Oz was kind of a nightmare. You have scenes where asbestos is being used as fake snow. The makeup effects on all of the main actors were famously painful, left scars in a lot of cases. It was a real ordeal making this picture.
The film has become iconic as a queer text. I don't think it's hard to see why. It's literally about a girl who's dreaming big in this black and white world, who goes on this adventure to this like Technicolor fantasy and meets all these sort of out of control characters, these larger than life people, and just wants to find a new version of home.
Wizard of Oz is not a movie directed particularly artistically, but there's so much artistry in it, so much craftsmanship, and it becomes greater than the sum of its parts. You kind of can't imagine cinematic fantasy without it. You have these musicals like Wicked that play entirely with its mythology because that mythology is so deep, that mythology is so broad and is so vivid, and all these remakes and reimaginings only serve to reinforce how great the original is.
I saw The Wizard of Oz in theaters for the first time recently, and I saw the toughest looking guy ever melt when it turned Technicolor. He was like a little kid again. And I think that that happens to all of us when we watch it. Even when we think about it or we hear Over the Rainbow, we're suddenly kids again and we feel like Dorothy ourselves.